We have walked this planet for a really long time. If you count all the members of the genus Homo as human, then we've been kicking around for roughly 2 million years. Our particular species Homo sapiens has existed for about 300,000 years, give or take. And during that stretch of time, we've gotten into a lot of trouble. We started out in Africa, where we would eventually spread to every corner of the globe. But this world we crawled out into was nothing like what you see today. It was raw wilderness. Danger was everywhere you looked. Every shadow could be hiding something that wanted to eat you. Hey, likes and subscribes keep these going, so yeah. Where's everyone at right now? Drop your city and time. Got a comment from someone in Zurich at 7 a.m. saying good morning, right under someone in San Diego saying good night. The internet's weird but kind of amazing. Our ancestors would eventually become the dominant species on this little blue planet, but they paid a heavy price along the way. For thousands upon thousands of years, they went toe-to-toe with some of the most brutal predators and dangerous animals that have ever existed. From cats with teeth like daggers to crocodiles that hunted on land, they saw it all. Today we're going to talk about the most terrifying creatures our ancestors ran into as they spread across the world. Some of these things will blow your mind. Before our species was even recognizable as its own thing, we were already getting hunted by the savage wildlife of Africa. A lot of these animals are still around today, which is pretty wild when you think about it. Sub-Saharan Africa actually has more surviving Ice Age megafauna than anywhere else on Earth. People sometimes assume that the big animals alive today are relatively modern, but that is not the case at all. Lions and leopards and elephants have been roaming around for over 1 million years. Our ancient African relatives would have had to watch their backs constantly. Lions, hyenas, leopards and crocodiles were all extremely efficient killers back then. But here is the thing. A group of early humans would not have been completely helpless. We had pointy sticks and we had some smarts. The predators definitely learned to be careful around us. There is another advantage people tend to overlook about walking on 2 legs, and that is intimidation. A big male lion only stands about 1.2 meters at the shoulder. That is roughly 4 feet. But when you stand upright like we do, you look a lot bigger than you actually are. Most animals will back down from something that looks intimidating because their brains cannot figure out if the threat is real or not. Standing tall, waving your arms around and screaming would have been one of our best defensive moves. Anyways, what I am getting at is that we actually had a fighting chance out there. Sure, we got eaten sometimes, but by the time our species showed up, we were not nearly as vulnerable as the earlier hominins. Those Australopithecines had it rough, man. They really struggled. Most of the bad encounters with these African predators probably happen during hunts or at night. Lions and hyenas get really aggressive when there is a fresh kill involved. When times are tough, predators get bold. Imagine a few hunters standing over an antelope they just killed, and a pack of hyenas showing up to take it. That situation probably ended badly for everyone involved. Nighttime would have been even worse. Our senses at night are garbage. We can barely see anything. Our hearing is not great, and our sense of smell is honestly pathetic compared to most animals. Walking around after dark in the African wilderness would have been asking for trouble. Even sleeping was dangerous. Leopards are incredibly stealthy, and they would have been efficient killers of early humans. About 70% of baboon deaths in the wild are caused by leopard attacks. Hyenas were just as brutal. You might have heard about hyena attacks that still happen in parts of Africa today. They are known to sneak up on sleeping people in the middle of the night and drag them away. Humans are capable of a lot of things, but one thing we definitely are not is nocturnal. That was a serious problem for our ancestors. Another terrifying reality these people dealt with was crocodile attacks. The sheer brutality of these cold-blooded monsters is unmatched in the entire animal kingdom. The way they explode out of the water in the blink of an eye is a humbling reminder that nature does not care about you at all. Unfortunately, crocodiles still kill a lot of people every year. That tells us something important, though. Even now, with all our technology and supposedly superior intelligence, these creatures are still picking us off. That should give you some perspective on what our ancestors were dealing with. Then there is another killer that people tend to forget about, the hippopotamus. In recent years, a lot of people have learned that this chunky animal we all thought was cute as kids is actually an extremely aggressive killing machine. You might have heard the stat that they are the most dangerous large animal in Africa. They take out an estimated 500 people every year. They have massive teeth, they have horrible tempers, and they can outrun any person on land. Not an animal you want to mess with. Another particularly nasty predator our ancestors ran into was Homotherium. This cat was around for our entire existence in Africa, and it only went extinct relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. It had longer teeth than any cat alive today, which is why people call it the scimitar cat. It was about the same size as a male African lion, and it was built to take down big prey. Running into one of these things in the wild would have been a really bad day. Africa has always been and still is a dangerous place when it comes to wildlife. But compared to some of the other lost worlds our ancestors wandered into, it is actually kind of familiar. The real nightmare lands were waiting for them elsewhere. Europe is the place most people picture when they think about human prehistory. You know the imagery. Beautiful untamed wilderness covered in snow. Brutal winters that would kill the unprepared. Up until relatively recently, this land was crawling with predators that would make your skin crawl. One of the absolute scariest was the cave bear. These animals were basically living tanks. When they stood up on their hind legs, they reached 3.5 meters tall. That is about 11.5 feet of pure muscle and fury. They were not skinny either. They had these massive domed heads and thick, powerful bodies. The bigger specimens we have found might have weighed up to 1,000 kilograms. That is 2,200 pounds of bear. To put that in perspective, cave bears were comparable to Kodiak bears in terms of raw bulk. But even the most enormous Kodiak bear ever recorded was about 700 pounds lighter than its cave-dwelling cousin. Think about that for a second. What makes it even crazier is that humans definitely had face-to-face encounters with these monsters. Neanderthals lived alongside them for hundreds of thousands of years. Our species coexisted with cave bears for maybe 20,000 years in Europe. There is actually a cave bear skull that has a devastating hole punched through it. That wound was almost certainly fatal, and it was almost certainly inflicted by a human weapon. Since both species were living in caves at the same time, there is no doubt in my mind that some absolutely legendary battles went down between us and these bears. We can only imagine what those clashes were like. The other predators roaming Europe were nothing to laugh at either. Wolves, brown bears, cave hyenas, and even leopards prowled the landscape. An encounter with any of them could easily turn deadly. One animal I tend to think of as more awe-inspiring than terrifying was the cave lion. These beasts were significantly larger than modern lions. They weighed as much as the biggest tigers alive today. The reason I find them so breathtaking is because of how they were depicted in cave paintings, like the ones at Chauvet. Those images were drawn in a way that still feels alive 30,000 years later. I can actually picture what those people were seeing in their daily lives just by looking at those paintings. It seems like the artist did not fear these animals. They did not draw them as monsters or villains. There is this realism to the images that makes me think these ancient people actually respected and maybe even admired these dangerous predators. Europe back then would have been an absolutely brutal environment. You can imagine that during the winter months it was a cutthroat fight for survival between every living creature. It really blows my mind when I think about the fact that, since I have European ancestry, my distant relatives who are connected to me only through genetics actually witnessed this world with their own eyes. They lived through it. That is wild. A lot of these animals were not limited to what we call Europe today. In reality, all of northern Eurasia was more or less one giant ecosystem called the Mammoth Steppe. These lands were just as harsh and unforgiving as Europe. South of there, you had the more temperate regions of Central Asia, where all kinds of big cats roamed alongside giant elephants and something you might not expect. Wait, dire wolves in Asia? You might be asking yourself that right now. Well, this very year, the first fossil of a dire wolf found outside of the Americas turned up in China. It is a small specimen, only about 4 inches long, but over a dozen different features and measurements confirm it belonged to a dire wolf, not a regular Eurasian wolf. Some scientists are still skeptical, and it has not been proven beyond all doubt, but as of now, the evidence points to dire wolf. Even with this discovery, we know dire wolves never really thrived in Asia. There just are not enough remains to suggest they were a major part of the ecosystem there. But considering how rare fossilization is, this was obviously not the only dire wolf in all of Asia. They could have had small, struggling populations on the edges of the continent that just never took off. It is still amazing to think that our ancestors migrating through the area might have bumped into these unfamiliar canines before eventually running into entire populations of them in the Americas. But Central Asia had plenty of its own native monsters to deal with. As I mentioned, there were tons of big cats roaming around back then. Leopards and tigers lived in Asia just like they do today. Tigers are absolutely ferocious animals that are known to hunt and kill humans who let their guard down. They are actually bigger than lions and way more stealthy. These expert ambush predators would have been a constant threat to migrating bands of Homo sapiens trying to push through the region. Other cats included the Sri Lankan lion, which was a subspecies that went extinct around 37,000 years ago. Our species definitely crossed paths with these animals on their journey through Asia. Must have been one hell of a trip, honestly. Think about what it would have been like dispersing through the Near East and into India. Sure, there would have been plenty of game to hunt, but there would have been just as many things trying to hunt you. Imagine having to worry about entire prides of lions during the day, and then individual stealthy tigers stalking you at night. Our ancestors were some tough people, man. Asia also had some scarier versions of animals we know from Africa. Hexaprotodon sivalensis was an extinct species of hippo. It was actually a bit smaller than modern hippos, but it had even more terrifying teeth. If these things had the same horrible temperament as hippos today, and there is no reason to think they did not, then people were definitely getting chomped on when they tried to get a drink of water. But maybe the most dangerous animal in all of Eurasia at that time was the hulking Paleoloxodon namadicus. This beast was probably the largest land animal to walk the earth since the dinosaurs went extinct. Upper estimates put its weight at around 22 tons. That is nearly 50,000 pounds. It was also extremely tall, standing about 5.2 meters at the shoulder. That is 17 feet of pure muscle and bone towering over everything. Now those are the most extreme estimates, and plenty of individuals would have been smaller. But even an average Paleoloxodon was roughly 3 times heavier than the biggest elephants alive today. Think about that. Our species, not some earlier hominin, but our actual species, got to see the biggest animal of the last 65 million years walking around in the flesh. What are the odds that we got the lucky? Unfortunately, we're not those people. We are just their descendants. But some of our ancestors might not have been so lucky when they encountered these giants. These animals were massive, and they almost certainly had bad tempers like modern elephants. Even though we were tiny compared to them, they probably did not even care. If one of them got angry, any part of its body could have killed a human instantly. They may have actually been the single most dangerous animal on the planet during that period. Late Ice Age Asia was an incredible place, but the animals there were still somewhat familiar to what our ancestors knew. The real alien world was waiting for them somewhere else entirely, a land where nothing had ever seen a human before. So now let us venture to a much more unfamiliar place. Nowadays, Australia is a pretty chill place. I mean, sure, you've got crocodiles and dingoes running around, but the wildlife there today is honestly a pale shadow of what it used to be. Only about 50,000 years ago, that continent was an absolute wonderland of crazy animals. A vibrant ecosystem packed with creatures you would not believe. Humans first showed up in Australia roughly 60,000 years ago. They made the crossing when sea levels were way lower than they are now, and Australia was connected to New Guinea as part of what we call the Sahel Shelf. They walked right into a land that had never seen anything like them before. See, here is the thing. As our species spread across the world, most of the places we showed up had already been occupied by Homo erectus for millions of years. That means the local animals had some idea of what a human-shaped creature was capable of. They had learned to be cautious around things that walked on two legs. But Australia was different. The animals there had absolutely no clue what we were. They had never encountered a hominin in their entire evolutionary history. This might be one of the big reasons why so much of the Australian megafauna went extinct after we arrived. They just did not know to be afraid of us. Of course, a changing climate probably played a role too, but either way, it is crazy how well people ended up thriving in that place. Because they were living alongside animals that looked like they crawled straight out of a nightmare. The two most terrifying creatures early Australians had to deal with were probably a pair of reptilian apex predators. Quincana and Megalania were leftover relics from a much older world, remnants of an era when reptiles ruled everything. Quincana is an animal I find absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, even though this genus existed for over 20 million years, the fossil remains we have are really incomplete. We just do not know that much about it, which is a shame because what we do know is wild. These things had long legs built for running on land. They had vicious teeth designed for slicing through flesh. Scientists estimate they ranged anywhere from 3 meters to 9 meters in length. That is 10 to 30 feet of land-dwelling crocodile. The weight estimates are even harder to pin down, maybe around 200 kilograms for an average specimen. But I have to imagine a 30-foot individual would have weighed a lot more than that. Despite this animal being one of the most unique predators of the past 10 million years, we know frustratingly little about how it actually lived. But given that it was massive and survived for such an insanely long time, it was clearly doing something right. It was an apex predator without question. Now, crocodiles are already terrifying, right? Those things scare the hell out of me. But now imagine a crocodile with long legs that could chase you down on dry land, running faster than you could ever hope to move. Absolutely nightmare fuel. The other cold-blooded monster sharing Australia with early humans was Megalania. This thing was basically a Komodo dragon on steroids, a giant monitor lizard that holds the title of largest lizard to ever exist. Unfortunately, just like Quincana, we do not have complete fossils, so the size estimates are tricky. Conservative numbers put it at about 5.5 meters long, weighing around 575 kilograms. That is 18 feet and over 1,200 pounds of lizard. But other methods suggest it could have gotten much bigger. Some specimens might have reached 7 to almost 8 meters in length. That is 23 to 26 feet. An animal that size could have weighed close to 1,900 kilograms, almost 4,300 pounds. Now that upper estimate is probably rare. Very few individuals would have gotten that massive, but even your average megalania was huge and incredibly powerful. And here is the really scary part. These things almost certainly had venom glands just like their modern relatives. So on top of razor-sharp teeth and a bite force that could crush bone, they were also pumping toxic saliva into their victims. Running into one of these animals in the bush would have been terrifying. With their low profile, they could hide in vegetation and ambush you before you even knew they were there. One bite would have been more than enough to kill a person. If the largest estimates are accurate, and some of these lizards really did hit 8 meters and 1,900 kilograms, they would have been absolute powerhouses. A beast that size could have trampled a human without even trying. Both Quincana and Megalania were still around when people first set foot on Australia. Those early humans genuinely lived in a time of monsters, like something out of a horror movie except it was real life. There was another predator worth talking about too, Thylacoleo. These marsupials were some of the strangest mammalian hunters that have ever existed. They had these bizarre bolt-cutter jaws with teeth that looked like sabers sticking out of their mouths. And pound for pound, they had the strongest bite of any mammal species ever measured. They were roughly the size of a female lion, and through millions of years of evolution, they ended up looking remarkably similar to big cats, even though they were not related at all. What makes Thylacoleo even weirder is where it came from. Its ancestors were plant eaters. Somewhere along the line, this lineage of herbivores made the switch to hunting meat and developed all these crazy predatory features. That is why everything about it seems so unusual compared to other carnivores. Scientists consider Thylacoleo the most specialized mammalian predator of all time. When you look at what early Australians were dealing with between giant land crocs, monster lizards, and these freaky marsupial lions, it is honestly amazing anyone survived. And I guess you could throw saltwater crocodiles on that list too, since they were definitely around. Plus all the venomous snakes. Since we are already in this part of the world, let me talk about New Zealand for a second. Besides Dan Hooker and Israel Adesanya, New Zealand is a pretty mellow place these days. There are really no native predators left other than the stuff humans brought over. But not that long ago, in the grand scheme of things, the islands were home to the largest eagle that has ever lived, the Haast eagle. These birds only weighed about 15 kilograms, which is around 33 pounds. That might not sound like much, but for an eagle that is absolutely massive, roughly twice the size of a harpy eagle. Now, a full-grown adult human probably would not have had too much to worry about from these birds. But children would have been easy targets. Just imagine a kid wandering off and getting snatched up by an eagle with a wingspan wider than a car. That is a parent's worst nightmare. What is really interesting about Haast eagles is how recently they disappeared. They only went extinct around 1400 when the Maori finished hunting the moa to oblivion. The moa were giant flightless birds that the eagles depended on for food. Once the moa were gone, the eagles had nothing left to eat. Running into one of these massive birds of prey would have been a scary experience for sure. Probably not as terrifying as a giant land crocodile or a venomous monitor lizard the size of a truck, but still not something you would want swooping down at you. I figured I should give New Zealand some love though. A surprising chunk of my audience is from there. Anyways, we still have 2 whole continents left to cover. The beautiful Americas. These lands that I call home have some of the most stunning landscapes on the planet. Right now in North America, you can still find mountain lions and jaguars and wolves and multiple species of bears, including grizzlies and black bears and polar bears. But only about 11,000 years ago, both North and South America were absolutely packed with classic Ice Age megafauna, the stuff of legends. One of the animals that has gotten a ton of attention in recent years is the short-faced bear. And for good reason. These things were terrifying. But most people do not realize there were actually two different groups of short-faced bears, Arctodus in North America and Arctotherium down in South America. Both of them had short, powerful jaws that could generate incredible crushing force. The North American version is the more famous one. They were enormous. The biggest Arctodus individuals might have weighed over 1,200 kilograms. That is 2,600 pounds of bear. They were also insanely tall. Standing on their hind legs, they reach somewhere between 3.4 and 3.7 meters, 11 to 12 feet of towering predator looking down at you. For comparison, modern grizzly bears only stand about 2.4 meters tall, 8 feet. Even the tallest bears alive today max out around 3 meters or 10 feet. These short-faced bears dwarfed everything. When humans first crossed into the Americas somewhere between 20 and 30,000 years ago, the Ice Age ecosystem was still going strong. The ancestors of Native Americans lived alongside these bears for over 10,000 years. People used to think humans did not arrive in the Americas until maybe 10 to 15,000 years ago, which would mean we barely overlapped with the megafauna. But recent discoveries have pushed that date back past 20,000 years. We now know that humans were an active part of this ecosystem for a very long time. Just like in Europe, these people witnessed the Ice Age world in all its glory. We're still not totally sure about the exact timeline of when people first entered the continent and how long it took them to spread all the way down to South America. But regardless of the specifics, they would have encountered everything this land had to offer, and waiting for them in South America was perhaps the greatest beast on this entire list, the South American short-faced bear, Arctotherium. This thing was even bigger than its North American cousin. It stood somewhere between 3.4 and 4.3 meters tall. That is 11 to 14 feet of bear. It was not just tall either. It was absolutely massive in terms of weight. Early estimates put it anywhere from 980 to 2,000 kilograms. That is 2,100 to 4,500 pounds. Later research suggested the upper limit was probably around 1,749 kilograms, about 3,850 pounds. That makes Arctotherium the largest genus of bear to ever exist. It is also a serious contender for the largest mammalian land predator of all time. We can only imagine what the first people wandering into South America thought when they saw one of these things standing up. Let us just hope this bear was more interested in eating plants than eating us. But there is so much more to cover about the Americas. These continents were home to predators that would make your head spin. Creatures that seem almost mythical today, but were very much real when our ancestors arrived. I want to go back to Australia for a second though, because I did not do it justice. Think about what those first people experienced. They crossed over from Southeast Asia, probably island hopping, and using simple boats or rafts. They landed on shores where literally nothing recognized them as a threat. The megafauna there had evolved for millions of years without any primate predators. No apes, no monkeys, definitely no humans. When we showed up, it must have been complete chaos for the local wildlife. Animals that should have run away probably just stood there confused, easy pickings for hungry humans with spears. But that worked both ways. Those giant reptiles and marsupial predators had no fear of us either. They did not know to avoid our camps at night. They did not know that a group of humans with fire and weapons was dangerous. The first few generations of Australians probably had some absolutely horrific encounters before the wildlife figured out what was happening. Imagine setting up camp for the night. You get a fire going, everyone settles into sleep, and then out of the darkness comes something you have never seen before. A lizard the size of a small bus dragging itself toward your group, or a crocodile running at you on long legs like some kind of prehistoric horror. Those people were tough as nails, man. They had to be. The extinction of all these Australian giants happened relatively quickly after human arrival. Within maybe 10 to 20,000 years, most of them were gone. Whether we hunted them to extinction or just disrupted their ecosystems enough to push them over the edge is still debated. Climate change was happening at the same time too, so it is hard to untangle what killed what. But the timing is suspicious. Humans show up and suddenly all these animals that survived millions of years of environmental changes just happen to die off. I'm not saying we did it alone, but we probably did not help. The same pattern repeated itself everywhere humans went. We arrive somewhere new. The big animals start disappearing. It happened in Australia. It happened in the Americas. It happened on islands all over the Pacific. We were and still are a force of nature. Anyways, back to the Americas, because that is where some of the wildest stuff went down. The Ice Age Americas were like nothing else on Earth at that time. You had this incredible mix of familiar animals and completely alien creatures. Wolves that were not really wolves, cheetahs that were not really cheetahs, lions that actually were lions, just way bigger than anything alive today. And cats. So many cats. Cats with teeth so long they looked like they belonged in a fantasy novel. Cats that would pin you down with their massive front legs while they figured out the best angle to stab you in the throat. The first Americans did not have an easy time of it, but they made it work. They spread across 2 entire continents in just a few thousand years, hunting and gathering their way from the Arctic Circle all the way down to the tip of Patagonia. They figured out how to live in deserts and rainforests and frozen tundra. They hunted mammoths and mastodons and giant ground sloths. They were badasses, basically. Our ancestors were incredible survivors. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me slow down and actually talk about some of these American predators in detail, because trust me, they deserve it. Besides the giant bears, another absolutely fearsome predator stalking the Americas was Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat. Now there were actually 3 different species of these things running around. Smilodon gracilis was the smallest. It was about the size of a modern mountain lion, so still dangerous but not the real monster of the group. Smilodon fatalis was the most common one. It was roughly the size of a big lion and mainly lived in North America. But the largest species mostly stuck to South America. Smilodon populator was massive. Upper estimates put its weight at around 436 kilograms. That is 960 pounds of cat with knives sticking out of its face. It was one of the biggest cats that has ever lived. All 3 species were absolute marvels when you think about how evolution shaped them. Those giant saber-teeth are like nothing else in the animal kingdom. Sure, other cats throughout history have had elongated canines, but none of them were as large or as fragile as what Smilodon was working with. These teeth were not built for brute force. They were precision instruments. See, here is the thing about those fangs. They were actually pretty delicate compared to what you might expect. If a Smilodon just chomped down on struggling prey the way a lion does, it would risk snapping those long teeth right off. That would basically be a death sentence. A saber. Toothed cat with broken sabers is not going to last long. Scientists think they would use their incredibly powerful front legs to grab onto prey and hold it still. Then once the animal was pinned and could not thrash around, they would carefully drive those long fangs into the throat. A lion is intimidating enough on its own right. Now picture a cat that is even bigger than a lion with teeth that are 28 centimeters long. That is 11 inches of dagger coming at your neck. Absolutely terrifying. It blows my mind to think that just like the people who painted cave lions at Chauvet, there were humans in the Americas who saw these saber-toothed cats with their own eyes. They watched them hunt. They competed with them for food. They probably lost friends and family to them. These were not mythical creatures. They were part of everyday life for thousands of years. Another group of predators that roamed both North and South America were dire wolves. Now here is something wild that a lot of people might not know yet. Dire wolves are not actually wolves anymore, at least not according to recent genetic research. It was discovered pretty recently that dire wolves split off from the ancestors of modern wolves about 6 million years ago. To put that in perspective, that is roughly how long ago our lineage separated from chimpanzees. So even though dire wolves looked almost exactly like grey wolves, and probably behaved a lot like them too, they were only distant cousins at best. This is a crazy example of convergent evolution. Two completely separate lineages ended up looking nearly identical because they were filling the same ecological niche. If you saw a dire wolf walking around, you would probably just think it was a really big wolf. But genetically speaking, it was about as closely related to a wolf as you are to a chimp. Think about that for a second. You and a chimpanzee look pretty different, right? You act differently. You think differently. But dire wolves and grey wolves looked almost the same. They probably hunted the same way. They probably had similar social structures. Evolution is wild, man. It can take two completely unrelated animals and mold them into nearly identical forms just because that form works well for a particular lifestyle. Dire wolves almost certainly hunted in packs just like modern wolves do. They would have been capable of bringing down some seriously large prey. Modern grey wolves are about 20% smaller than dire wolves were, and they can still take down muskox and even bison when they work together. Imagine what a pack of bigger, stronger versions could do. They would have been serious competition for the first Americans. Both species were trying to hunt the same animals. Both species were smart and social and dangerous. It must have been tense out there. Here is something I find really interesting. The original waves of people migrating into the Americas apparently did not bring dogs with them, or if they did, those dogs died out because we have no evidence of them. The dogs that existed in the Americas before Europeans showed up had a last common ancestor with Eurasian dogs from only about 15,000 years ago. That is way after people first arrived. So I wonder what those early Americans thought when they first saw dire wolves. At that point, their dogs back in Asia were still pretty wolf-like. It would have been an easy observation to make that these animals looked related to the canines they knew. But I wonder if it was obvious that something was different about them. Did dire wolves act strangely compared to grey wolves? Did they smell different? Were they more aggressive or less afraid of humans? We will never know, but man, it is fun to think about. Those first Americans were walking into a world where everything was just slightly off from what they knew. Familiar enough to recognize, but different enough to be unsettling. Giant versions of animals they had seen before. Predators that acted almost like wolves, but were not quite right. It must have been disorienting in a way we cannot really understand today. We grow up knowing what animals exist in our world. We have nature documentaries and zoos and the internet. Those people had none of that. Every new species they encountered was a genuine discovery. Every unfamiliar roar in the night was something they had never heard before and had no way to prepare for. I almost forgot how wild Ice Age America was. I've not really thought about this stuff in a while, and going through all of it again is reminding me why I find it so fascinating. This was a world that existed just a few hundred generations ago. In evolutionary terms, that is nothing. Blink and you miss it. Another unique predator prowling around back then was the American cheetah. And just like the dire wolf, this animal was not actually what its name suggests. It was not a real cheetah at all. It is another case of convergent evolution, where an animal evolved to look like something it was not related to. The American cheetah was actually closely related to mountain lions, but in terms of body shape it looked a lot like the cheetahs we know from Africa. It had long legs built for speed. It had an expanded nasal cavity that would have helped it breathe while running at high speeds. Scientists think it was probably a pretty fast runner. Some people have suggested that its legacy lives on in one of the animals it used to chase, the pronghorn. You might know pronghorns as the second fastest land animal on Earth. They can hit speeds that seem completely unnecessary for the environment they live in today. No predator in modern North America can even come close to catching a healthy pronghorn. So why did they evolve to be so ridiculously fast? The theory is that they evolved this way to outrun the American cheetah. It sounds like a cool idea, and I have to admit when I first heard it, I thought it made a lot of sense. A predator and prey locked in an evolutionary arms race, both getting faster and faster over millions of years. It is a romantic notion. But the more you look into it, the less likely it seems. We do not actually know how fast the American cheetah could run, and they often lived in areas where pronghorns were not even found. In places like the Grand Canyon, scientists think they probably hunted mountain goats more like snow leopards do today, scrambling up rocky cliffs after nimble prey rather than chasing things across open plains. So the connection between extinct cheetahs and modern pronghorns is probably not as neat as people want it to be. But regardless, it is interesting to think about how animals that are alive today might still carry the legacy of predators that disappeared thousands of years ago. I actually got to see a pronghorn in person once, and I have to say, those things are insanely fast. It is almost hard to believe when you watch them move. And here is a random fact that always gets me. Pronghorns are not actually members of the deer family. Their closest living relative is the giraffe. How crazy is that? Okay, so can you believe I almost forgot to talk about the American lion? I was going through everything in my head and suddenly realized I had completely skipped over one of the most impressive cats that ever lived. I had to go back and make sure I covered this one because it absolutely deserves attention. The American lion ranged all the way from Canada down to Mexico. It was about 25% larger than modern African lions, which already tells you something. These were big animals. Unlike the fake wolves and fake cheetahs I just talked about, the American lion was actually a real lion. It was a genuine member of the lion family, not just something that looked like one through convergent evolution. The size of this animal has been a bit controversial among scientists. A study back in 2009 found that male American lions averaged around 256 kilograms. That is 564 pounds. The largest specimen they analysed came in at 351 kilograms, or 774 pounds. But then a study in 2012 estimated a much wider range. They suggested these lions could have weighed anywhere from 235 to 523 kilograms. That is 518 to 1153 pounds on the upper end. If that larger estimate is accurate, it would mean American lions were actually heavier than Smilodon. Since Smilodon populator mainly lived in South America, the American lions roaming North America would have outweighed most of the saber-toothed cats they encountered. That is saying something when you consider how massive those cats were. I sometimes wonder how these two apex predators interacted with each other. Did they avoid each other? Did they fight over kills? Were there territories where one species dominated and others where the balance shifted? Lions today are incredibly territorial and will kill other predators that encroach on their space. I cannot imagine American lions were any different. Picture this. You are a human hunter tracking a herd of bison across the Great Plains. You finally bring one down after hours of coordinated effort. Your whole band is exhausted but excited, and then you hear it. A roar that shakes the ground. You look up and see a pack of American lions heading your way. These are not the lions from Africa you've heard stories about. These things are bigger, much bigger, and they want your kill. What do? Do you stand your ground and risk a fight with animals that outweigh you by 4 or 5 times? Do you abandon the meat you worked so hard to get? There were no easy answers out there. They lived on open plains just like African lions do today, and they hunted large game. Horses, bison, deer, camels. Yeah, there were camels in North America back then. The Americas were wild. Running into an American lion would have been absolutely terrifying, but I guess at the end of the day they were just really big lions, and even regular-sized lions can ruin your whole week if you're not careful. So encountering one that was more than twice the weight of what we see in Africa today, yeah, that would have been a bad time. A really bad time. The thing about lions is they are social hunters. They do not come at you alone. If you see one, there are probably more nearby that you have not spotted yet. A pride of oversized American lions working together would have been nearly unstoppable. Our ancestors must have developed serious strategies for avoiding these animals, or at least surviving encounters with them. Maybe they learned which areas the lions preferred and steered clear. Maybe they developed warning systems to alert the group when big cats were spotted. Maybe they just got really good at climbing trees really fast. Whatever they did, it worked, because we are still here talking about it. The Americas had so many predators, it is honestly hard to keep track of them all. You had giant bears that could stand 14 feet tall, saber-toothed cats with 11-inch fangs, packs of dire wolves that were not even really wolves, speed demons that looked like cheetahs but were actually related to mountain lions, and lions that were bigger than anything alive in Africa today. Our ancestors walked right into this. They did not have guns. They did not have metal tools. They had stone weapons and fire and their wits. And somehow they not only survived but thrived. They spread across 2 entire continents and became the dominant force in every ecosystem they entered. These people were not primitive in any way that matters. They were smart and adaptable and tough as hell. They had to be. Because the Ice Age Americas did not give anyone a free pass. Every day was a test. Every hunt was a gamble, and the penalty for failure was usually death. I think modern people sometimes look at our ancestors and assume they were less intelligent or less capable than us. That could not be further from the truth. They had the same brains we do, the same capacity for problem solving and creativity and emotional depth. They just face challenges we cannot even imagine. Try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. No grocery stores, no hospitals, no walls to keep the predators out at night. Just you and your family against a world filled with animals that could kill you in seconds. And yet generation after generation they made it work. They raised children. They built cultures. They created art and music and stories that we are still finding traces of today. Our ancestors were heroes in the truest sense of the word. Every single one of us is descended from people who survived situations that would break most modern humans. We carry their genes and their legacy with us, whether we realize it or not. But we're not done yet. There are still some incredible animals left to talk about. Creatures that were not predators, but were just as dangerous, if not more so. Giant sloths that could crush a man with their claws. Terror birds that were basically living dinosaurs walking around on two legs. And some of the most amazing rock art evidence of human encounters with megafauna that has ever been discovered anywhere on Earth. The story of when we met monsters is far from over. Megatherium, the giant ground sloth. Now this thing was not a predator. It was a plant eater through and through. But that does not mean it was safe to be around. Not even close. These animals were absolutely massive. We are talking about 4,000 kilograms here. That is 8,800 pounds of sloth. To put that in perspective, that is more than twice the weight of the South American short-faced bear I talked about earlier. And that bear was already one of the largest mammalian predators ever. When you hear the word sloth, you probably think of those cute little guys hanging upside down in trees moving in slow motion. Forget all of that. Megatherium was nothing like its modern relatives. These things walked on the ground. They stood upright to reach high branches, and when they did, they towered over everything around them. Megatherium had claws that could tear a person apart without even trying. Massive curved things that it probably used to pull down tree branches and strip bark. But if one of these sloths got angry or felt threatened, those same claws could easily kill a human. One swipe and you are done. Your ribcage would be opened up like a can of beans. I do not imagine many predators messed with giant sloths. What would even try? A smilodon, maybe. But even a saber-toothed cat would have to think twice before attacking something that big with weapons like that. Humans, on the other hand, we have a tendency to hunt things regardless of how dangerous they are. We are kind of crazy like that, and we actually have evidence of these encounters. Some of the most fascinating rock art ever discovered shows exactly what happened when humans ran into giant sloths. There is this incredible site in Colombia, a rock face covered in ancient paintings made by some of the first people to live in South America. And one of the scenes depicted there is absolutely wild. It shows a group of 6 humans apparently confronting what looks like an angry giant sloth. The sloth appears to be rearing up on its hind legs. It is drawn with these huge prominent claws. And there might even be a baby sloth in the scene, which could explain why the mother looks so aggressive. If this was a megatherium they were depicting, then these people were facing down an animal that weighed nearly 9,000 pounds. Standing on its hind legs, it would have towered over them. Those claws would have been longer than their spears. Now, we're not totally sure if megatherium specifically lived in Colombia. It might have been a different species of giant sloth. There were actually quite a few different kinds roaming around South America back then. But regardless of the exact species, these were massive animals with deadly natural weapons. This scene is one of the most fascinating pieces of rock art anywhere in the world. You can see the sloth rearing up, possibly defending its young. You can see the humans gathered together, probably trying to figure out what to do. It is a snapshot of a moment that happened thousands of years ago, a confrontation between our ancestors and one of the strange giants of the Ice Age. I love thinking about what was going through the minds of those people. Were they hunting the sloth? Did they stumble onto it by accident? Were they terrified or excited or both? We will never know the full story, but the fact that someone took the time to paint this scene tells us it was important to them. It was worth remembering, worth passing down to future generations. Rock art like this is incredibly precious because it gives us a direct window into the lives of ancient people. We can study bones and tools all day long, but art tells us what mattered to them, what they thought about, what experiences were significant enough to record on stone, and apparently running into giant sloths made the cut, which tells you something about how impactful these encounters must have been. The Americas had a lot of weird animals that seem almost impossible when you think about them today. And a big reason for that goes back to something that happened about 3 million years before humans even showed up. The Great American Biotic Interchange. That is the name scientists give to what happened when North and South America finally connected. For about 100 million years, South America had been completely isolated. It was basically a giant island continent floating around on its own. The animals there evolved in total isolation, developing into forms that existed nowhere else on Earth. When the land bridge formed and the two continents joined, everything changed. Animals from the north started pouring into the south. Cats and bears and wolves and all sorts of other predators that had never existed in South America before suddenly showed up and started competing for resources. This was catastrophic for a lot of the native South American wildlife. Species that had dominated for millions of years suddenly found themselves facing competition they had never evolved to handle. Many of them went extinct. One group that got hit particularly hard were the terror birds, the Forus racids. These animals had been the apex predators of South America for an incredibly long time. They were basically the closest thing to dinosaurs that existed in the age of mammals. Think about that for a second. These were giant flightless birds, descendants of the dinosaurs that survived the asteroid impact 66 million years ago. While the rest of the world was being taken over by mammalian predators, South America still had these prehistoric-looking monsters running around eating everything they could catch. It was almost like the Cretaceous period never ended down there, birds ruling over mammals instead of the other way around, a completely alternate version of what life could look like when evolution goes down a different path. The largest terror bird stood over 3 meters tall. That is 10 feet of angry bird with a massive hooked beak designed for tearing flesh. They could not fly, but they could run incredibly fast. Some scientists think they might have been able to reach speeds of over 60 kilometers per hour. Try outrunning that when you're a small mammal just trying to survive. Their beaks were weapons, not just for eating, but for killing. They would chase down prey and then use those massive hooked jaws to deliver devastating strikes. Some researchers think they might have picked up smaller animals and slammed them against the ground to kill them. Others think they used their beaks like hatchets, chopping down at their victims over and over. For tens of millions of years, these birds were the undisputed kings of South America. Nothing could challenge them. Then the land bridge formed, and suddenly they were competing with saber-toothed cats and giant bears and wolves, animals that were just as deadly but had evolved in a much more competitive environment. The terror birds started declining. Their numbers dropped. Species went extinct one after another. By the time humans arrived in South America, most of the really big terror birds were probably already gone. But maybe not all of them. There is one species called Psilopterus that might have survived until relatively recently. Some evidence suggests it only went extinct around 18,000 years ago. Now, Psilopterus was not one of the giant terror birds. It was actually pretty small compared to its ancestors, more of a shadow of what the group used to be. But 18,000 years, Argo-humans were definitely in South America, which means there is a chance that some of our ancestors actually encountered living terror birds. Not the massive 10-foot monsters of the distant past, but still, an actual terror bird. a living, breathing descendant of the dinosaurs walking around on two legs. That is incredible to think about. We came so close to overlapping with these animals. Just a little bit earlier, and humans might have faced off against the really big ones, the stuff of nightmares. 10-foot-tall birds with hatchet beaks chasing down our ancestors across the South American plains. Part of me wishes we had gotten there sooner just so we could have seen them. The other part of me is glad we missed the worst of it. Those things would have been genuinely dangerous. A predator that size that can run 60 kilometers an hour and has millions of years of hunting experience built into its instincts. Yeah, no thanks. You know what is funny? If you have ever seen the movie 10,000 BC, there is a scene where people in Eurasia are getting chased by terror birds, which makes absolutely no sense because terror birds only ever lived in the Americas, and by 10,000 BC they were almost certainly completely extinct anyway. That movie is really inaccurate, but I guess historical accuracy is not what they were going for. Anyway, the point is that South America was basically a lost world. A place where evolution had gone in completely different directions than anywhere else on the planet. When our ancestors finally made it there, they encountered animals that would have seemed almost alien compared to what they knew from Africa and Eurasia. Giant sloths the size of elephants, armadillos as big as cars. I am not exaggerating about the armadillos, by the way. Glyptodonts were real, and they were enormous. Imagine a Volkswagen Beetle covered in armor plates waddling around the grasslands. That is basically what these things looked like, and maybe the last remnants of a lineage of predatory birds that had ruled the continent for longer than mammals have dominated anywhere else. South America was the last great wilderness, the final frontier for human expansion. When our ancestors arrived there, they completed a journey that had started in Africa hundreds of thousands of years earlier. They had crossed continents and oceans and ice sheets. They had survived predators on 4 different landmasses. And finally they reached a place so strange and so isolated that even they must have been amazed by what they found. It is honestly hard to wrap your head around how different the world was back then. We think of the present as normal, as the way things are supposed to be. But what we have now is just a snapshot, a brief moment in a constantly changing story that has been going on for billions of years. 20,000 years ago, you could have walked from Alaska to the tip of Argentina and seen things that would blow your mind at every step. Mammoths and mastodons in the north, giant bears and saber-toothed cats throughout, massive sloths and glyptodonts in the south, and humans, small groups of incredibly tough people making their way through all of it. Those people are the reason we exist. Every single person alive today is descended from individuals who survived the Ice Age, who faced down predators that make modern wildlife look tame by comparison, who figured out how to thrive in environments that would kill most of us within days. I think about that sometimes. The sheer improbability of any of us being here. Thousands of generations of people all making it through, all surviving long enough to have children who survived long enough to have children. An unbroken chain stretching back hundreds of thousands of years through all the danger and hardship and uncertainty. We are the product of that, the end result of countless successful gambles against impossible odds. The Ice Age world is gone now. The megafauna that defined it for millions of years disappeared in what amounts to the blink of an eye. Some of them we hunted to extinction. Some of them could not adapt to the changing climate. Some of them probably fell victim to a combination of both. But traces of that world remain. In fossils buried beneath our feet. In cave paintings preserved on stone walls. in the genetic legacy carried by the descendants of animals that survived, and in us, in the cultures and stories and instincts that were shaped by living alongside monsters. We are the last witnesses to that world, the final link to an era that will never come again. And I think there is something important about remembering that, about understanding where we came from and what our ancestors went through to get us here. The story of human evolution is not just about bones and tools and migration patterns. It is about encounters, moments when our ancestors came face to face with creatures that could kill them, moments of fear and wonder and sometimes triumph, moments that shaped who we are on a fundamental level. When we met monsters, we did not just survive, we prevailed. We spread across every continent. We outlasted every other human species. We became the dominant force on this planet in a way that no other animal has ever achieved. That is our legacy. That is what the Ice Age gave us. Not just survival, but dominance. Not just existence, but mastery. And it all started with our ancestors looking into the eyes of a predator and refusing to back down. So here we are at the end of this journey. We have travelled from the savannas of Africa through the frozen wastelands of Europe, across the steppes of Asia, into the nightmare continent of Australia, and finally through the strange lost worlds of the Americas. And honestly, I still cannot wrap my head around all of it. In just the past 20 or 30,000 years, our species walked alongside some of the most incredible animals that have ever existed. We saw the largest land animal since the dinosaurs disappeared. We competed with what might be the largest mammalian predator of all time. We shared caves with bears that weighed over a ton. We watched saber-toothed cats drag down prey with 11-inch fangs. This was not some distant chapter of prehistory that happened to creatures we would barely recognize. This was us, Homo sapiens, people with the same brains and the same emotions and the same capacity for love and fear and wonder that we have today. They looked up at the same stars we see at night. They held their children the same way we hold ours. They laughed and cried and told stories around fires just like humans have always done. The only difference is that when they stepped outside their camps in the morning, they had to watch out for things that could eat them. I think we take for granted how safe our world is now. Most people alive today will never encounter a predator that views them as food. We have built cities and roads and fences that keep the dangerous animals out. We have guns and cars and helicopters if we ever need to deal with something threatening. The idea of being hunted is basically foreign to us. But for 99% of human history, that was just normal life. Every single day you had to be aware of what was around you. Every trip to get water could be your last if a crocodile was waiting. Every night you slept with one ear open, listening for the sound of something approaching your camp. Our ancestors lived with that constant low-level awareness that most of us have never experienced. And somehow, they did not just survive. They thrived. They spread to every corner of the planet. They developed tools and art and language and culture. They became us. I find that incredible. Genuinely incredible. Sometimes I look at modern humans complaining about minor inconveniences, and I think about what our ancestors went through. They did not have grocery stores or climate control or antibiotics. They did not have locks on their doors because they did not have doors. Every meal was something they had to find or catch or dig out of the ground. Every injury was potentially fatal. Every winter was a test of survival. And yet, here we are. Billions of us spread across a planet that our ancestors conquered one dangerous step at a time. You know what gets me the most about all this? It is not the size of the animals or how dangerous they were. It is the fact that the people who lived with them thought it was normal. For them, this was just how the world worked. Giant bears and saber-toothed cats and enormous elephants were not extraordinary. They were just part of life. Can you imagine growing up in a world where seeing a cave lion was as unremarkable as seeing a deer is for us today? Where your grandparents had stories about friends who got killed by hyenas? Where everyone in your tribe had personally witnessed predators taking down prey that weighed more than a truck? That was reality for thousands of generations, an unbroken line of people living in a world that would terrify most of us. And they handled it. They figured it out. They passed on their knowledge and their genes, and eventually their descendants built the civilization we live in now. We owe everything to those people. Every comfort we enjoy, every safety we take for granted, every moment we spend not worrying about being eaten alive. All of it exists because our ancestors were tough enough and smart enough and stubborn enough to make it through. I think there is something important about remembering that, about staying connected to where we came from. Modern life can feel disconnected from nature. We spend our days staring at screens in climate-controlled boxes eating food that someone else grew and processed and packaged for us. It is easy to forget that we are still animals, still part of the same web of life that produced cave bears and mammoths and terror birds. We have only been living this way for a tiny fraction of our existence. Agriculture is maybe 12,000 years old. Cities are even younger. The Industrial Revolution happened just a couple hundred years ago. Smartphones have been around for less than 2 decades. For the vast majority of human history, we lived in small bands wandering through landscapes filled with animals that could kill us. That is what we evolved for. That is what our bodies and minds are designed to handle. This modern world, with its offices and traffic jams and social media, is the weird anomaly. Not the other way around. The megafauna are gone now. Most of them anyway. The Ice Age ended and the world changed, and one by one the giants disappeared. We will never see a living mammoth or a saber-toothed cat or a giant ground sloth. Those animals exist now only in bones and paintings and the corners of our imagination. But their world shaped us. The challenges they presented made us who we are. Our big brains and our social bonds and our tool use and our incredible adaptability. All of that evolved in response to a world full of monsters. We are literally built to handle danger. It is written into our DNA. Maybe that is why we're so fascinated by these animals. Why documentaries about prehistoric predators get millions of views. Why museums full of dinosaur bones draw crowds every single day. There is something deep in us that recognizes these creatures. Some ancient part of our brain that remembers what it was like to share a world with giants. Or maybe we're just drawn to things that are awesome, and there is no denying that a saber-toothed cat or a short-faced bear or a giant monitor lizard is pretty freaking awesome. I started this whole thing by saying that humans have been around for a very long time. And we have. 2 million years if you count all the species in our genus. 300,000 if you only count Homo sapiens. That is an almost incomprehensible stretch of time. Generations beyond, counting. Lives beyond numbering. And for most of that time the world looked nothing like it does today. It was wilder and more dangerous and more alive in some ways than anything we know now. A world where megafauna still roamed and humans were just one species among many trying to carve out a place to survive. We should be thankful that our ancestors got to witness that world, that they got to see these incredible animals with their own eyes, that they lived through experiences that we can only imagine and dream about. because in a way we got to see it too, through their art and their stories and the legacy they left behind, through the bones they are still digging up and the caves they painted 30,000 years ago, through the simple fact that we exist at all, which means they made it. They survived long enough to pass the torch to the next generation, and the next, and the next, until eventually it reached us. We are the children of monster slayers, the descendants of people who looked into the eyes of predators and refused to be prey. Every single one of us carries the blood of survivors in our veins. That is a hell of a legacy to live up to. So next time you're feeling like the world is too much or life is too hard, just remember what your ancestors went through. Remember the cave bears and the saber-toothed cats. Remember the land crocodiles and the giant monitor lizards. Remember the terror birds and the short-faced bears and all the other nightmares that our people faced down and outlasted. You come from a long line of absolute badasses. Act like it. Anyway, I hope this sparked your imagination about what our ancestors experienced, about the incredible animals they encountered on their journey across the world. It blows my mind that people just like us witnessed these things, that the Ice Age was not some abstract period of history, but a real time when real humans lived real lives surrounded by creatures we can barely imagine. We're so lucky to be here, to exist at all, to be the latest link in a chain that stretches back through all that danger and uncertainty and somehow never broke. Our ancestors earned this world for us. The least we can do is remember what they went through to give it to us. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. I make videos about human history and ancient animals and occasionally longer stuff like this. If any of that sounds interesting, feel free to check out what else I have made. I will catch you on the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.